G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are meticulously well. I'm well. I'm in Sydney. This is my first interstate trip on an aeroplane in years and years. And here we are testing out the amazing new lens from Viltrox. This is a 13mm 1.4 native Z lens. And it comes with all the goodness that you'd want. Autofocus, auto aperture, it's all in there. Now this is an APS-C lens, which means it works perfectly on a ZFC or a Z50. But of course, you can use it on your Z9 or your Z7 in APS-C mode, and you still get 19.5 megapixels with those 45 megapixel cameras. So this is a multi-purpose lens. Now being cropped, the 13mm becomes 19.5, which Viltrox call in their marketing a 20. And what's a 20mm good for? Well, it's great for things like selfies, like vlogging, but it's also great for landscapes. And because we're in Sydney, well, we're going to head out to one of the best landscapes that you can see in the world, Sydney Harbour Bridge, Sydney Opera House. Let's do it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So what's interesting about these third-party lenses, and Viltrox, so far, to the best of my understanding, are the company that have committed most to making fully AF and fully controlled aperture, remote-controlled apertures. These lenses are pretty good. They're pretty good value, and they perform pretty well. What we've seen in the past is things like chromatic aberration and perhaps edge sharpness are not quite as good. This guy, though, it is the latest in their range, and I do think Viltrox continue to work on all of that stuff. So we will be looking at edge sharpness, which is tough with such a wide lens, and we will be looking at suppression of chromatic aberration. We're going to get out into this crazy sunshine that you can see up there, Harbour Bridge, and get ourselves some nice sharp edges with high contrast. Let's go find some of those.
4, 4, 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 1.
So one thing about these lenses, one thing about a ZFC and a Z50 that we have to keep in mind, because these days I'm pretty used to it, is we don't have in-body image stabilization. So it's a bit of a con. Not a con as in a pro and con. And it's just something to think about. Obviously you stick it on any of the full frame Zs, a Z5, Z6, Z7, Z9, Z62, Z72, you've got IBIS. But this combination right here, no IBIS. And that's something that I lean into a little bit. So something you just got to think about. I just wanted to jump into the video here and show you what electronic VR can do built into the ZFC and the Z50. Here it is. Now, it's not 100% clear to me whether this lens is fully recognised by the ZFC, but obviously we know its name, and AF and aperture control work. I'll leave it up to you to decide how good you think that is. Now, here we are in a part of Sydney that, quite frankly, their laneway culture is coming along very nicely, thanks very much, and it's absolutely beautiful. I feel like I might be in Italy or Paris or Spain. It's really nice. Great cakes.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, let's check out the files here from the Viltrox, and as we can see, we are on the AF13 1.4Z. It's the Viltrox lens, and we are on the ZFC. Here's an image shot into the sun, potential for chromatic aberration here, and if we go into 100%, this is a 5K screen with a 4K video stream, but we can see here no signs of chromatic aberration. Might not appear under these conditions, perhaps not quite harsh enough. George Street, Sydney, looking at the Apple Store, and we can see here this building right on the edge of frame. I think there is the slightest, if we look right up here in the corner. So there is a tiny amount of distortion, but it's very, very mild. I don't believe the Capture One knows this lens. We can also see here over on this side with this curve here that there is a slight amount of distortion, but it is minor. Shooting into the sun again, chromatic aberration, not seeing it. Flare suppression, good. Solid, this is a solid performer. Here I wanted to show the short depth of field, so we're at 2.5 f 1.4. The background focus, it's a little bit jittery, but you know, as I've said before, every lens has a different kind of bokeh, and this one has its own type. It looks a little onion ringy, but I don't mind it. For the type of lens that it is and the price that you pay, there is no sense that you are not getting the amount of detail that you'd want here. Now, is it as sharp as a Z lens? Well, probably not, but I do think it's pretty close. I love this building with the bamboo. And here we are in a darkened laneway with a little bit of a European feel. We're shooting at ISO 125th at f1.4. Again, what a great holiday lens to couple with your Z50 or your ZFC or any of the other Z mount cameras if you don't mind the crop. But there is a great amount of sharpness. Now this is a 2.5, so I'm not wide open here, but we can see here, that looks pretty damn sharp to me. We can see it's most sharp here in the middle. Still considering depth of field, I'm pretty impressed by this lens. I think it's sharp across the majority of the lens. 1.4 on a wall, just to get a bit of a sense of sharpness. We can see for sure it's sharp in the middle there, and it is falling off a little bit, but it's just mild, and some of that could be angle of attack, depth of field, and it's just falling out of focus as opposed to being lens sharpness. And I would say that's a pretty good outcome. Probably not quite as sharp, but looking good. And it's nice and wide. It's a 19.5 field of view equivalent.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1,
Well, here we are in one of the most famous places in the world. We are walking on Sydney Harbour Bridge. We've got the Sydney Opera House right there, and there's Sydney. The Viltrox 13mm 1.4, it's a great travel lens. It's rugged, it's all metal design, so it's a little bit heavier than you might want it to be. But for that, you get a pretty good lens at a great price that's really going to fit in your kit nicely if you want to do the low light work. I mean, obviously you can have zooms. Compact zooms are compromised with their f-stops, whereas this thing, 1.4, it's a great option. Of course, you can't just work with a 19.5 field of view equivalent, 35mm. You do need some other lenses with you as well.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
This is the sort of place that you might see chromatic aberration up here in the corners and looking very good, very sharp. I'm impressed by what I'm seeing here from this third-party lens. I don't mind this little lens flare here. We can see the edges are pretty undistorted, and sharpness, focus is down here somewhere, and we can see so much is in focus when you've got such a wide lens and you're shooting at 2.8. And here we just get a bit of a look at the dynamic range of the Nikon sensors. And this is great because we can still pull up the shadows a heap, and we can drag down the highlights a little bit. And it's amazing that that is full sunlight and full shadow. And that's working pretty well. Obviously, we've got some bouncing ambient light. Construction on the Sydney Harbour Bridge started in July of 1923 and didn't finish until March of 1932, 9 years later. And it is such a beautiful bridge. I really enjoy looking at the superstructure and just how every little piece, every little rivet, every little piece of metal puts it all together. And it is like a giant Meccano set. Chromatic aberration, again, seems to be pretty under control. Flare is looking good. I think that Viltrox have done a good job with this APS-C lens. I like what I'm seeing here. Everything is nice and sharp, nice and clear. It's well rendered, and we are at f3.2. This is some of the shops as you get to the other side, the North Shore. And again, we can bring up the shadow areas and see what's there, and a lovely flare. I like that lens flare that we are seeing there. This is a view from the north across and the beautiful expanse of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and we can bring up that beautiful detail that's under there. Now I think the bridge is pretty much being constantly painted just to ensure that it doesn't rust. It's got a thick layer of paint on it that just keeps going. And if you were making a final version of this, you might bring the shadow area up separately This is just a very, very quick mask, but we can see here how simple it is to do something like this. And all that details there. Again, this is just the ZFC and the Viltrox giving you great results.
The Viltrox 13mm 1.4 Z mount native lens, full AF, full metering, aperture coupled. Threw it on the Z9. The Z9 knew that it was an APS-C lens and it cropped itself to DX. It's a great lens. It's a good option. You've got to decide for yourself. Again, we come back to the same age-old question. Do you want to go third party? Third parties don't know what the future holds. First party, they do. They can make lenses for the future. These guys can only make lenses for what they know right now. But as usual with Viltrox, build quality is good. The focus throw has great resistance. We've got a great aperture. It doesn't click, it's a smooth one, so it's in a way designed for video. But the reality is I control my aperture from the button here at the front anyway. So, is this lens for you? Should you buy it? Well, it's an interesting question. The only reason to buy this lens is, one, it's cheaper, and two, well, it doesn't actually exist in the native Z mount from Nikon yet. So, that's a great reason to get it. It doesn't exist. 19.5mm, 1.4 aperture, fully automated with AF and aperture. There's a lot to love. And looking at it, it's sharp, it's fast to focus. It doesn't seem to have too much distortion, although I do think there is a little bit of it. Chromatic aberration appears to be suppressed really, really well. So it's a prime lens. There's not much else to it. It's APS-C. I would have thought APS-C lenses are easier to make because, well, you're dealing with much smaller glass that you've got to get right. If you're shooting on a cropped sensor Nikon and you've wanted a really wide lens that'll work for vlogging and blogging, as well as landscape and travel and architecture and all those sorts of things, I think this is a pretty good entry point. And again, it's giving you a lens that doesn't currently natively exist from Nikon. And of course, it is native, it is a Z lens, it's just a third-party Z lens. Let me know in the comments below, is the Viltrox 13mm for you? Would you be getting it for your Z50 or your ZFC? It's been so good to see you. If this is your first time here, well, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. And don't forget to check out my website, mattirwin.com, and enjoy Sydney Harbour.